Confession 1. Tools versus People. I had only been at the company for 2 months, but we had just completed a high-profile project on time and within budget using Scrum. What made this unique was that many Scrum Masters had struggled to deliver projects smoothly. Even if they did meet the deadline, it was usually artificial since they usually struggled with an extremely high number of technical issues or bugs, and the Scrum process was rarely followed to the letter. I had been given lots of excellent feedback from all the managers in the department, which really encouraged me, made me feel confident, and gave me the start I needed in the company. Although the project team were set to continue with another release, my program manager had other ideas for me.
Paul, I have another project for you, and this one has very high visibility with the board of directors.
She explained how the new team had been working without a Scrum Master, how the team was set to gain another 4 members, and how the project needed to deliver within 3 months. From experience, I knew this was a very short space of time to inspect and adapt with a predominantly new team. The program manager continued to brief me on how the product owner, Rob, was a very difficult person to deal with. He had a reputation for throwing his toys out of the pram. I decided to bear her advice in mind, but give the product owner a chance. A week later, I met with Rob. He gave me an excellent overview of the product and had been very well organized in mapping out the dependencies. "So, can I see the product backlog?" I asked. Rob began to talk me through the fact that the product backlog actually existed in 2 places. There was a backlog stored in the online tool, which allowed one of the team members to work from home. There was also a printed copy of the backlog in a room near the team's area. This was because one of the 2 developers was very passionate and opinionated about working with paper story cards. Although I began my career with paper cards, I had quickly seen and coached on the benefit of using a software tool when used to the best of its ability. I was well versed in the agile principle of people and communication over processes and tools, and I worked well with both paper and electronic product backlogs, so this was not a problem to me. However, my gut told me that 2 versions of a large backlog were going to become a problem. The next day, I met the program manager again and told her how well the meeting had gone. Rob seemed like a cool guy to me. She warned me not to take him at face value, and she turned out to be right, but I'll save that for another story. She proceeded to tell me that the new starters had joined the team, and that I would meet them at the daily Scrum stand-up later that morning. I walked upstairs and kicked off the stand-up meeting at 10:30 on the dot. This is where I met the team, which consisted of John, Seb, Claire, and Gordon. Seb, Claire, and Gordon were new to the company, having started only 1 week earlier. John was a veteran within the company and had been in many Scrum teams. He was known not only for his skill as a software engineer, but also as an opinionated man with a reputation for taking issue with projects. The others were not shy either, but for now all were pretty quiet at the daily Scrum. None of them raised issues, and all appeared to know what they were doing for the day. I took some time to build a rapport with them, and although they were not the most talkative bunch, we seemed to get on well. Later that day, there was a meeting to discuss the product backlog with the director of product. The product owner was away, so I used the printed backlog as a reference and held the meeting. The team were also present since the purpose of the meeting was to discuss progress thus far. In talking through the backlog, John's ears pricked up. Looking at the board where the backlog stories were stuck, he exclaimed, "Those stories are wrong." The room turned to him. "We did those ages ago, and some of them were rewritten weeks ago." The director took notice, but there was no hint of anger. I concealed my embarrassment. It turned out that there had been a mismatch between the printed and electronic versions of the backlog. While the electronic backlog was more up-to-date, the paper backlog was obsolete. We concluded the meeting, and I set about thinking how to resolve the problem. In all my time at the company, an electronic tool-based backlog had proved very effective. Stakeholders had visibility, the product owner could make updates from anywhere, team members could work from home, and, most importantly, as with paper cards, there was only one version of the backlog. Another point related to the product owners. They had a reputation for reluctance to manage their backlog, and even a reluctance to perform their Scrum duties and turn up to meetings. Using paper cards put a much greater reliance on their being on time before we could make any progress. It meant we had to call our often off-site product owner before we could even discuss upcoming features. I decided that, on such a mission-critical project with only 4 sprints in which to deliver, we should not take the chance of using paper. I felt that if the success of the project depended on such a critical factor, I needed to make this decision quickly. I played with the idea of raising it for debate, but after some thought I decided that the risk of stirring up unnecessary fuss and worry about using the tool was too great and not worth it. Besides, the team had been using the tool anyway. All I was going to do was use it exclusively. I set about telling Martha, the substitute product owner who was covering for Rob, my plan and why it was important.
"As long as we get the work done, I honestly don't care," she said.
Later that week, we had our first planning meeting. I knew that this would be challenging for us. Not only did we have a team of mostly new developers and a new substitute product owner, we also had a number of people who were new to Scrum and who were quite opinionated, one of whom was pretty set in his ways. I knew that this was also probably the first time that anyone except me had used a tool for planning. However, I also knew that the new product owner had no interest in the backlog, and that the paper backlog was resulting in cards lost and misplaced. Note: I had been spending some time building a relationship with the product owner and explaining the benefits of our practices. However, Martha was well known for letting messages go in one ear and out of the other. We also needed to support one member working from home that the tool was already helping. I kicked off the meeting bang on time. The team were in pretty good spirits, so I had high hopes. "Right, guys, let's have some fun. As you can see, here's our backlog," I said, pointing to the screen with the software backlog. John looked at the screen in a less than enthusiastic way. I began to explain the planning game to the team. Martha, the substitute product owner, talked through each story. We came to a point at which the story needed updating. Using the tool, we decided that the story needed to be dragged out of the sprint backlog, as Martha did not want the work done within the sprint. She dragged the story out using the mouse. A swirly graphic appeared as the computer processed the move. Suddenly, there was an outburst. "This is driving me nuts," said John. We all looked at him. "In Agile, we're not meant to do things that slow us down. That thing is slowing us down." Now, although I knew very well that there was some truth in what John was saying, his approach was abrupt and negative. I felt that he was picking on a loading icon as proof that planning was being slowed down. Despite my feeling, I quietly pointed out that although I took his point, overall planning was smooth, it just took some getting used to. This, however, was not enough for John. He continued to speak about the virtues of Agile and about how frustrating this was. The other developers, new to the company and eager to bond with their fellow teammate, backed him up. I could see that the temperature was rising for the team. I was not angry about John's suggestion, but his approach did frustrate me. I concealed my feelings. "Okay," I said. I was simply trying to explain why this might appear slower. I was also trying to avoid duplication. If you're more comfortable with paper cards, let's use paper cards. I left the room to get the paper so we could rewrite the stories. When I came back, everyone had stopped complaining. They seemed almost shocked that I took their point on board. The planning meeting continued, and we planned the sprint. The next day, I took some time to think about what had happened and how the team may have felt. However John expressed it, this was possibly an issue for the whole team. I felt satisfied with my decision to go back to paper cards, even though I knew the benefits of the tool. Weeks later, the team actually did begin to see the positives of the tool and decided themselves not to use it in meetings, but to use it outside of meetings. Nevertheless, this event was significant for my career. From my point of view, taking the decision to use a tool instead of paper cards was in the best interests of the team. It avoided duplication, made life easier for the less than enthusiastic product owner, and allowed the team to work from home. However, the frustration it caused in that first meeting negated a lot of the good it brought. In an effort to help the team, I put a tool before them. If I had given the reasons up front and allowed them to make a decision, I would have strengthened our relationship and possibly created a different outcome for that meeting. Lessons learned. Avoid duplicate backlogs. I could have explained from the outset to the team that we should always have only one version of the truth. If you need a paper copy of the electronic backlog, I advise you to always make sure that the electronic copy is up to date and to consider the printouts temporary. Otherwise, find a method to make a paper backlog work. If the product owner is not around, maybe the backlog can be left near the team. This is not ideal, which is why the electronic backlog seemed to work well. Good relationships solve problems. Working harder on my relationship with the product owner and team would have made it easier to explain my reasons for an electronic backlog. Instead, I was concerned that I would cause a fuss because my team were at times very negative. I advise you to spend time building solid relationships so that people have open ears when you discuss important or difficult topics. Team decisions. I could have involved the team much earlier. I advise you to involve the team in decisions of this nature that affect them. There is nothing wrong with giving them a recommendation. The main task for a Scrum Master is to uphold the rules in the Scrum Guide. Getting the whole Scrum team to collaborate is a big part of this. How to store the backlog is something the product owner should be most involved in, and the team should also feel comfortable enough to raise any blockers. A Scrum Master is then able to approach the issue from the point of view of a blocker that needs to be resolved. Explain benefits. I did not explain the benefits of the approach until the approach was challenged. If you're passionate and confident about something, explain its benefits to the team before asking for it to be implemented. This includes the team, empowers them, and creates a collaborative environment.